Hello there and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour. My name is Draxtor and today I am in my non-humanoid embodiment. I was going to say the dragon, but you be the judge who I am, because the guest today is Joe Haldeman, sci-fi master Joe Haldeman, author of The Forever War and countless books. I'm actually going to ask him how many books he wrote. I don't know if he even knows. And Joe is also in his non-humanoid embodiment today. So for this occasion, we both are sort of shapeshifter, avatar shifter. Hello, Joe. How are you?
Hello. I'm fine. In fact, I'm feeling very avatarish. How are you?
I feel exactly the same, avatarish, but I am almost always an avatar, and you are only for this occasion as you're visiting me in virtual reality. How does it feel to be this person? Is that your essence?
Yes. That's my distilled essence.
A one-eyed with a big eye, though, so you can see everything. You don't need two eyes.
It's a very big eye. I never even have to turn my head.
So you are the author of many books. Do you know how many books you wrote?
You know, it depends on how you count them, because I think 21. But how do you count a collaboration? Is that half a book? I don't know. I collaborated with my brother on one, and well, I don't know. It's and two of them I use a house name. I wasn't allowed to take credit for the books. So do I own those? I wrote every word in them, so you would think they would be my books.
Why were you not allowed to take the name? So, I mean, oftentimes it's when a book turns out really shitty, then the author goes like, you know what, I'm going to put a different name on it.
Well, no, this is very simple. It was the character was Attar the Merman, so I was writing these adventure novels. And they asked me, well, there might be as many as a dozen in the series. Would you like to write a dozen books? And I said, no way in hell. I'm not going to write a dozen books about the same stupid water-breathing adventure guy. So they made me do them under a so-called house name, which meant the next person would also be Robert Graham. And I said, okay, no problem. As long as I can cash the check, says Joe Haldeman, that's fine.
Oh, I see. So this is basically an avatar. I mean, it's like the house avatar, and people just embody it and write something about, in this case, some sort of superhero that lives under the sea or something.
That's right, because they had other such creatures, other house names that did have as many as a half a dozen people writing adventures, numbered adventures, like, I don't know, Jackdaw the super bird or something like that.
Wow, I gotta pick up some. Are you happy with those? I mean, should I pick them up?
Oh, sure. I enjoyed doing them very much. They were fine.
But they're in a framework, because it's interesting. I mean, I usually do not. I try to avoid listening or watching author interviews before I have them on, so that I can sort of discover them. You know, I mean, I do some research on the biography, but
Right.
I did happen upon an interview with you where you talked about writing for hire within a framework, and you basically said that sometimes when you're in these situations, you realize, you know what, now I have to get up in the morning and I have to write, and that kind of changes the whole reasoning behind wanting to become an artist.
That's true. Yeah.
How was it with this particular gig?
Oh, no problem. Yeah, in fact, I think as you get older, it becomes less important. I mean, a true artist, and I mean that's lowercase true, lowercase artist, is not that involved with the ego aspect of it. You create, and you create as an everyday thing, and you just go ahead and do it. And tomorrow you'll create again, and you won't get any medals for it. You just go ahead and do it.
I completely agree with you. I think that's a misconception that some people have, that an artist is you know, I am the center of the universe, and if I don't, it's all about me. No, I would say it's about the work. But this is where it comes in. I mean, if you feel very strongly about the work, which is, yes, your name is on it, but ultimately it is the work that you're putting out, the idea that you want to bring across. And if there's a conflict between your work for hire, I mean, how do these conflicts play out?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, One source, perhaps, of confusion is language, because work done for a hire, those 4 words have a specific legal meaning, not just in English, but it's something where you have agreed that you no longer are the owner of the work, even though you created every word. Uh, and it's not a delicate thing. I mean, it's you are absolutely giving the ownership of your words over to somebody else, and most people are uncomfortable with that. I was certainly, but that was the requirement for writing these books, and I definitely wanted to write the books, partly because I did need the money, but part because it seemed like a real interesting challenge. And when you're young, challenges are part of the thing. But having done those 2 books, the challenge was absolutely filled, and I didn't feel like doing the third.
Hmm. What were those books called again, and what was the series?
One was called Attar's Revenge, and the other was what War of Nerves. Yes, War of Nerves. And I did a third one, which I only did about halfway, and said, "Oh, the hell with it."
But that was really then, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but that was really where you felt the challenge is sort of met, and now it becomes kind of a grind, and
That's right.
you cannot add any more, and you would like to add more interesting things and put that into the
Or,
ether.
it could just be you want to do something different. I think, for instance, if I were learning how to carve wood, and I carved this wonderful little woodpecker, and it looked really like a woodpecker, and it actually, you know, bent over and pecked at wood and made noise and everything like that. I wouldn't want to do it another time. I'd proven that I could do that, and it was interesting once.
This is fascinating to me because I was just talking about that sort of tongue-in-cheek with a friend of mine. I said, in terms of sort of Second Life videos that I make, I'm kind of the Rolling Stones of Second Life. I do the same thing over and over, and
Ah,
I'm fine with it. I mean, that's not really how I feel. I was a little tongue-in-cheek, but then I realized, am I really that person? But as I mean, there's 2 types of people. The Rolling Stones don't have a problem with
no,
writing the
that's
same
right.
song for 60 years. And Frank Zappa, my biggest idol, I mean, he was doing 180s from album to album, genre
Oh,
to
he was
genre. And
monumentally talented, yeah. But this is the thing. What are you getting out of it? I mean, and the Rolling Stones would be an extreme example, because once you're the most famous group in the world, and once you can have anything you want, and you have had everything you want, what are you going to do now? I think if you want to get a little cabin in the woods and just sit and look at the birds, I understand that. That sounds great.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, that would be completely legit.
yeah,
Now I realize the Rolling Stones are, in a way, maybe the coffee people who produce good coffee, and good coffee tastes good every morning. There's nothing
right.
wrong with it.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, when I studied jazz, and I want to get to this because you have you write about music a lot, and you have a storyline about Dixieland in the World's
Oh, yeah.
book, which I thought that was so awesome because my jazz professor used to always talk about Dixieland. He used to say, "You guys, you young guys, you think you want to reinvent everything right away, and you want to do bebop. You know what? You got to learn Dixieland. If you don't know
Right.
Dixieland, you don't know anything." And we were like 20, and we were like, "Yeah, shut up." and now that I'm
Yeah.
approaching 50, I go like, this dude was absolutely spot on. And he also used to say, when we say, "Oh, what should we improvise over this diminished chord?" And he would say, just play a diminished arpeggio. And I was like, you know what, that's lame. I mean, that's been done so many times. He said, you know what, a diminished arpeggio is like a good cup of coffee. Every morning it tastes good. And so real quick about the Forever War, we got to cover this. I mean, it's such a monumental classic. The Forever War came out, I believe, in 74 or 75. It is about a war against another race from somewhere in the galaxy. It started under false pretenses, which comes out later in the book. Sorry, spoiler alert. The Earth is being transformed into sort of almost 100% military economy to support this war. The war goes on for 1,000 years. and it's all from the point of view of a soldier that rises through the ranks, and at the very end, he's been told, you know what, the war is over and it's all good, and he basically dedicated his entire life to the military. You were in Vietnam, and it's pretty common knowledge that this book is using your experience. What would you say, is this a what is this book? I mean, is this a retelling of your experience? Is it an anti-war novel? Is it Vietnam in space? How would you describe it? And I want to say one more thing. The reason why this book is so important to me is when I was 14, 15, I was into fantasy, and I read all Robert E. Howard Conan books, and my mom was horrified because she thought it's all about naked women. And she went to the bookstore and she said, my son is into sci-fi fantasy. Do you have anything that is has a little bit more sort of literary substance? And they say, okay, here's Canticle of Leibowitz, and here's the Forever War. And so that's how I was introduced. But please go ahead. What is this book for you now? Looking back, I mean, you know, what is it, 40 years?
50, nearly.
Wow. It's almost like the Catch-22, which is right here in front of me.
Yeah. Well, let's see. In a way, I started writing it right after I got back from Vietnam, which was, you know, in the 69, 70. But I really wrote the book in, I guess, 72, 73. And the first hardcover came out in 74, or in January of 75, you know, around there somewhere. Well, what can you say? I wrote the book straight out of my Vietnam experience, yes. And so it's an autobiographical novel about a soldier. But also, because the Vietnam War was such a complex social thing, that had to color the autobiographical aspect of it. That is to say, when I was a soldier carrying a gun and walking through the jungles of Vietnam, there was no way I felt like I was a representative of the Kennedy, Johnson, you know, whatever, the United States government or army or anything. I was just a guy who was drafted against my will and put in a uniform. And, you know, what happened when they gave me my rifle? You know, I said, look, I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in killing for politics. And, you know, just don't even give me the fucking rifle. And the guy was an old grizzled man, and he said, listen, you've got to take it. You don't have to shoot anybody, but you got to carry it. Just do me a favor and take it. And in fact, the one they gave me didn't work. So I don't know whether they decided, well, let's give him this one. He's not going to pull the trigger. No, in fact, if you pull the trigger, it would fire one round and then jam. So it was not a really effective automatic weapon. And scratched into the stock of the weapon was, this machine doesn't work.
Yeah, but you may, it sounds to me that they may have actually, been sort of kind to you in a way.
I mean, why waste a weapon on somebody who's not going to use it? But yeah, I was in fact, when I was in Vietnam, most of the time I wasn't even carrying an M16. I was carrying an M14 for all of my Army stuff. And then they gave me an M16, but I never was in combat with it. I mean, I carried it, but I never shot it at anybody.
Mm-hmm. Vietnam, of course, is far away for my generation and my son's generation. But my son was born in 2003, when Iraq started, and technically his entire life he's been in a forever war. So this book is so timeless, if you will, which is amazing and deeply, deeply depressing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. But I don't care where in Europe or Asia you grew up. We've been in a militarized world almost everywhere. I mean, unless you grew up in a Buddhist sanctuary, You're surrounded by war.
In the book, it's one aspect that, I mean, there's so many details that are so, I mean, that built this world so parallel to ours, which is sort of this scam that the soldier Mandela comes back and he feels like, I accrued so much money, and then he comes back to Earth and the money is worth nothing, or the services are so expensive that essentially he has to go back to work for the military, which is his only skill.
Yeah.
We readers, we have to ask sci-fi authors for prescriptions how to get out of this SHIT. I'm going to swear.
Yeah.
I'm going to bleep you too. I might as well say shit because then I could bleep it. As you say, the whole world is militarized. Do you have a silver bullet how to get out of it? Find a different economic model. Find something that a job creator that is not based on killing others?
There are a lot of people that work on that, all I can say, and I wish them luck. I think there is a problem in that we're not close enough to the angels to not be human. And, we know what the right thing to do is. And everybody knows that we should lay down our arms and just talk and arrive at solutions to things without killing and torturing and blah, blah, blah. But we are an impatient race. We want easy answers. Even though we know that there are no easy answers, we keep trying and stomping all over each other in the pursuit of them.
I want to know about your process. I'm always fascinated. Do you have a set process? Some people actually time track themselves also with word count. It's now very popular to post this stuff on social media. I did 10,000 words, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Do you do that, or do you also have times of the day? Do you have a secluded area with no phones, or do you write in noisy places? What's the process?
I have to say that I've tried them all. That is to say, I've written in total seclusion, and I've written in the middle of Grand Central Station, literally the middle of Grand Central Station. And I think when the story wants to come to life, it does it. I mean, it doesn't depend on the circumstances. You can try to nurse it along by making the circumstances perfect, but it's not going to make the words appear. The words appear when they will. I think.
Wait, are you advocating just sitting there and letting inspiration hit you?
Yeah, sure. If that works. When that stops working, go do something else.
But at some point you got to execute, right? I mean, isn't it like a two-pronged process? I mean, you got to sort of brainstorm, bring those ideas, but then there's a grind part to it, no matter what.
Yes and no. There's a grind in that you do have to show up. But I think most people who write or create art for a living would agree that when it's really working, it's painless. It just does. It works itself. And that's what keeps you doing it. I'm only speaking for myself because I know there are people who work like dogs and they really sweat and they hate writing or they hate drawing or whatever they're doing for a living. But they go ahead and do it because, by God, you've got to put meat on the table and this and that. I enjoy it, especially when it's going well. It's wonderful. I'll look up, after I've written a couple of pages, I'll look and say, I'm getting paid for doing this. But that's the great way to do it.
And speaking of stuff that comes easy, my favorite book of yours that I plowed through as many as I could in preparation. My favorite one is the Hemingway Hoax, and the Hemingway Hoax is about a sort of a down and out writer who teams up with a con man, and they forge a lost novel by Ernest Hemingway, Nobel laureate, American author, who you should know, and if you don't, I'm not going to go into his biography. He's sort of the rugged the rugged individual. He was in World War II. He was in the Spanish-American War. He gets his hands dirty. And so these guys in your book, The Hemingway Hoax, they set out to they want to make a lot of money by forging this novel. And you were inspired undoubtedly by the Hitler diaries, which I'm very familiar with. In the early 80s, a big German weekly newspaper announced that they found secret Hitler diaries where he talks about farting, where he talks about his relationship with Eva Braun, and all sorts of personal crap.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, the public bought that, and of course, a few months later, it was revealed that this was all a hoax, and it was a complete forgery. Now, tell me how this Hemingway hoax idea came about. And one more thing, what is very cool about this Hemingway hoax book of yours is that the reason why another entity out of another dimension comes in to sort of stop that Hemingway hoax plan is that they have found out that the world is going to end if people, I mean, this is how I read the story, is if people engage too much with that kind of rugged individualism that Hemingway as a person represents. So I thought that was a hilarious conceit. I wonder what they're looking at. I mean, Trump is nowhere near any type of artistry, but I don't know if they're. Anyways, I'm digressing. Please go ahead. The Hemingway hoax story. How did it come about?
Well, I had read about Hemingway's life because I admired him as a writer and so forth and so on. Well, a part of his biography is when he lost a manuscript. He had written, I don't know, may have been as much as 80 pages of a novel. And it was sitting in Paris while he was up skiing someplace. And he sent his wife back to bring the manuscript so he could work on it at the ski lodge. And she lost it. She left it in a railway compartment. She got off the compartment to go get a drink of water or whatever. And when she came back, it was gone. And somebody had stolen it, evidently not for the manuscript itself, but for the leather case that it was in. And evidently threw the manuscript away. Of course, that manuscript would be worth literally tens of millions of dollars now, which is a lovely, lovely irony. But yeah, and I thought, I was just talking. I was explaining this to one of my students. I was waiting for an airplane. And literally, I went off to the bathroom. And when I came back, I had this sudden inspiration. I said, you could make millions of dollars if you forged that manuscript. But you could make thousands of dollars if you just wrote about somebody forging it, and you wouldn't go to jail or anything. So that's what I did, Actually, I got on the plane, and we were going to Australia, and we got to Heron Island, which was just the last stop before Australia. And I sat down and I wrote the outline for the story right there, about 20 small pages. I outlined the whole thing. And then over the next few months, I just wrote it. And it was, I don't know when I've written anything that went so easily.
That's amazing. And if you're watching this, you pick up this book, it's also a little eerie because, I mean, there is an other dimensional aspect to this story. And also, as we found out, there is a picture of Hemingway on his Wikipedia page that resembles you quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the book, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but it's unclear. The guy who engages in the forgery, the writer, the big Hemingway fan who feels like, he's kind of a loser, but then he really gets into it and he absorbs the Hemingway style. He kind of shifts between universes and we don't know who is who. I mean, I don't know if maybe you are Hemingway. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore.
I can't drink, so I can't be Hemingway, you see. But in fact, the picture of me that's on the back of the hardcover of the Hemingway Hoax my wife and I set it up so it's a dead-on counterfeit of a photograph that Hemingway put on the back of his books. I got I got the same shirt and rolled up the sleeves the same way, and I've got my little manual typewriter and everything.
That is fantastic. That is awesome. You were just talking about students. So you were teaching at MIT. You're no longer teaching right now, right?
No, I retired from that.
So, but the teaching, I wrote up a question here when I read the a accidental time machine, which is set at MIT. It's another wonderful book where a student discovers a time machine that only goes forward in specific increments, and he can kind of calculate. It goes forward a few days, then a week, then 100 years, 1,000 years, 30,000 years, millions of years. And he can only go forward, and he has to try to figure out how to go backwards. It's a wonderful book, and I was wondering while I was reading this, and being aware that you taught, is this something that you could actually teach? I was wondering, maybe Joe has in his curriculum how to write the perfect time machine story, because time machine stories, everybody loves. Time machine books, movies, and it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to make them airtight. I mean, in the story, obviously the logic only has to work within the world that you're creating, but that still is pretty hard. I mean, here with this one, you set out some parameters that are tough to follow through. So my question is twofold. How do you map this stuff out when you write a time machine story? And B, did your students ask, or did you have sort of a course, Time Machine 101 with Joe Haldeman at MIT?
No, but we covered the logistics of time travel stories when I taught science fiction writing. Of course, you can make up whatever you want so long as you don't stomp too hard on the laws of physics. The big constraint in the accidental time machine was that entropy does increase. No matter what you do, you're not going to get around that. And entropy is a rather subtle concept. So my guy, who's after all a mathematician, and pretty smart, he knows how to do that and how to work around it.
Entropy, how do you define it within the context of this story? I mean, if you set out the law, right? I mean, then you have to kind of follow through with it. I was always also wondering, could it be like you're writing and you're very comfortable with where the story goes, and then 200 pages in, you realize there's no way I can resolve this. If I don't, I mean, what do you do then? You just introduce another aspect?
Yeah, speaking theoretically, I guess that's what you do. You just sort of pace your room back and forth and say, oh, I know how I can do it. And then you have a dog barking off in another room, and everything resolves itself. That's not too bad an illustration. The thing is, if there were a way to just apply some set of logical structures and actually come around with an absolutely stunning finish to a story, then people would do that. But in fact, there isn't any actual way. See, it depends on what you mean by writing, because there are kinds of writing like confession stories and a certain kind of locked room mystery and so forth that are so hemmed in by rules that in fact you could almost write one by computer. And in fact, I did this. I wrote a computer program. I took Computer Science 101 back when I was a graduate student. And one of the things that I did was write a program that wrote World War I air combat stories.
Oh, my God.
Which have your basic kind of pattern, and only you change the geography under the planes and the nationality.
One aspect must be that you fall in love with you're serving in Italy and you're falling in love with an Italian girl.
Oh, that's I never got that complicated, really. But yes, that would be true. And of course, you would have a bottle of Chianti And maybe, who knows, an Italian dog barking in the other room. But you can tell it's an Italian dog, of course, by the way it barks. It's saying "Morchianti, Morchianti."
What did you learn with this process? Was that something where you realized, I actually don't enjoy writing those? I mean, there's any number of authors who go like, this is my bread and butter. I can
Yeah.
I can knock these out, and this is the framework, and they create a framework, and then they just fill it in.
Well, yeah.
I gather that this is not something that you would enjoy.
No, that's something I learned very, very well when I wrote the Robert Graham adventure novels. I could write one of them, and that was fun. I could demonstrate that I could do it. And then I write a second one and make it complicated enough that I can enjoy that. But looking at a third one, I thought, I have jumped through this hoop, and I got to the other side, and then I did it again to prove it wasn't a fluke. And what would a third time be? Why should I bother jumping through that goddamn hoop again? And there are people who enjoy having a paycheck, so they jump through the hoop and they keep doing it. And I've got nothing against them, but they're a different kind of writer from what I would call the normal writer, who has to keep surprising himself. There are people who write, especially things like series novels, where the idea is to keep reinforcing the same pattern over and over.
That is fascinating to me. But is that not driven by commerce primarily? I mean, that the publisher says, "Hey, we got to milk this a little bit more."
Yeah, but that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm-hmm. Of course, they repeat the same pattern because they tell themselves they have to do it. And this has driven whole huge blocks of literature, not just in American or English literature. You get a pattern which pays off consistently, and it can keep you can keep churning out books in that pattern for a century.
But it could also be cool because, I mean, you wrote. I only read Worlds, but there are others, and you create this universe in the book Worlds, and then you continue that. I mean, I guess that's different because it's on your own terms, and basically you're creating a universe that is so big that you can explore any number of other stories in there.
Yeah, and also I set it up as a single novel, which had 3 parts. So it's a trilogy, but it's actually just one book.
Okay.
It's a funny thing. It's a funny part of professional writing because you can find these patterns in the most artistic and demanding literary projects.
Right.
So I don't know. I think people obey the patterns without understanding them, and so are they being more creative if they don't understand what they're doing?
That's
so.
What, going back to my jazz professor who says, you know what, just because you don't understand bebop doesn't mean you invented something new. It can also sound like shit.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
But so then I gather, I mean, if you don't enjoy, I mean, it's not that black and white, but if you don't enjoy something that, like, what you call like a lock room, I guess, setup, and then you kind of solve this puzzle. Do you then more sort of write into the blue, and then while you're on this journey, sometime along the journey you figure out the end? I mean, I guess my question is, are you concerned about wrapping it up tightly or neatly?
That's very interesting because having had students and try to teach them how to create stories, I see that the enjoyment that various people get out of writing a story is quite different. Some people won't enjoy the story unless they don't know what's going to happen. And once they have decided what's going to happen, the whole thing has become boring to them. And I think these people can't really be fiction writers because repeating the same pattern is something that fiction writers do. And I think really good writers are not always aware that the pattern is something they've done before. You can look at formal poetry, which is where I often go to think about literature in theory. I mean, suppose all you did was write sonnets for the rest of your life. And the sonnet, of course, is a completely rigid form. You would still be able to write a lifetime's worth of different stories within that rigid form if that is the way you write. And you go to the other side of the thing and say, well, I want to be a William Burroughs kind of let it all hang out writer. Well, you can do that for the rest of your life too. And you know who's going to do the most original work? You can't say, because it depends on how good they
We're
are.
back at the Rolling Stones versus Frank Zappa the conundrum.
Yeah, and partly it's the taste of your audience. I mean, if your audience is loose as a goose and just says, "Oh, just keep surprising me and I'm okay," then that calls for a certain kind of performance. But like the only times I've really been satisfied as a musician were when I was playing in Dixieland, and Dixieland is as rigid as a sonnet. And you always know what you're doing. You know where you are with respect to the rest of the band members, and it's all within a fairly wild experimental framework. But within that wildness, you have the certain number of beats, a certain number of measures, a certain number of actual repetitions, and then I don't know. It's when you're in the groove, you're in the groove, and if what you are creating is repetitive in a certain way, well, all right, so is a sonnet.
Mm-hmm. What instrument do you play?
I most enjoyed the bass clarinet,
Oh, wow.
but I never owned my own bass clarinet. I just loved it, but they're very expensive. I had a tenor sax, and I played the tenor sax in marching band in college.
Oh, awesome.
And I sort of like the tenor sax, but the bass clarinet has a much nicer timbre. And, you feel the instrument while you're playing it, and it just feels good.
A few questions about short stories, because we're talking again sort of pattern and sort of structure. Sometimes it occurs to me when I read short stories, I always want to ask the author, how do you decide what is a short story, and what can you milk, my favorite word, for something bigger? I mean, you have this A Separate War is the short story collection that I read, and there's a short story in there called Foreclosure, which I would file under climate fiction. I mean, it's hilarious. A guy comes from another dimension and says, you guys here on Earth, we're going to take Earth over. He's the real estate agent from a different planet,
Yeah.
and he just basically, he lent it to the human race. I mean, that was an idea, or I figured like, okay, somebody else could have written an entire larger novel around that. I mean, how do you know? I mean, now, is this intuitive, where when an idea comes to you, where you go like, this is a short story versus a novel? Or what makes that determination? I mean, it could also be a process like, in the long run, career-wise, maybe, it's time to push a novel out versus a short story collection, or these kind of considerations.
Well, I don't think that way myself. Foreclosure, oddly enough, I think was written because an editor asked for that specific idea. I think I wrote it in one sitting, and just tippity tap 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 tap. Here we go. But novels tend to be more organic, if you will. They grow out of your own life. But I can't say, it's hard to generalize, because I have written novels that were just strictly commercial enterprises. The 2 Star Trek novels I wrote, I would never have come up with the idea to say, "Oh, I think I'll make a pointy-eared science advisor and a really stupid captain and have them do their thing." But yeah, while you're writing it, I don't know. I think it's as much fun to do one as the other.
But there's no consideration, like a strategic consideration. I guess this is sort of a Hollywood required, if you want to be a Hollywood producer, is to see like what can we chop up and squeeze out the return on investment out of this idea before people realize we watered it down, to the nth degree.
I'm not involved in production at that level. I understand the various tensions that a Hollywood producer are under don't have anything to do with storytelling, really. When you're writing a short story, it's pure storytelling. You're not, because you don't have a budget, you don't have any actors or anything to worry about. You just sort of type until the story's over. And to follow the question you asked a minute ago, sometimes I don't know when I start a story how long it's going to be, whether it's going to be a novel or a short story or what. I just have a situation.
Okay. So then you just you go on this journey. You go on you go with it for a ride. And
Exactly. I mean, the Forever War didn't start out to be a novel. And in fact, it was first published as a novelette in a magazine. And I just extended it to make a novel. And yet it's one of the most structured of my novels.
I forgot to mention. I just want to throw this in. If people watch this and they go like, their appetite, the appetite for Joe Haldeman is rising. In the Accidental Time Machine, there's many hilarious ideas, but one is when they go into the future, 3,000. I forgot how long they go in the future, or maybe 300,000 years. But basically, New Mexico has become a suburb of Los Angeles. And there is a character, sort of an AI, that calls itself LA, and that's the entire city sort of embodied in one being without any sort of fixed physical location. And it's a nice, curious person, but with the entirety of the LA vibe sort of as its core personality, which I found really hilarious. And I think
an element of satire there.
Yeah, no, it's just fantastic. And then going back to the short stories and the themes that reoccur here. For example, also in the separate war short story collection, For Whitehill is a great story. I mean, I found it to be very poetic, and it's pretty abstract, and it deals with art as so many of your stories do. I mean, is that I don't want to kind of like say the Haldeman flavor is art and love will save the planet. Is it that kind of the hippie
Right.
ethos that you're trying to push? Is that your message, Joe?
No, I don't think so. Of course, the structure of For Whitehill is a Shakespearean sonnet, period. And it is in 14 chapters, and each chapter is a line of a sonnet, though that was never revealed within the story. If I have anything that is consistent with my writing, unfortunately, it's nothing so high-minded. It's just sort of a love of structure. And so that For Whitehill is the most pure example of that.
I would assume that this is not something that you would repeat. I mean, again, we're talking about the same thing.
No.
Somebody would go, "Oh, that went well. Let's do this 50 more times."
Yeah, well, some people would do that.
The other story that I plowed through was Camouflage, which is really awesome. And Camouflage is about two undetected aliens that have been on the Earth for millions of years, and they don't remember where they come from, and they sort of discover who they are by interacting and engaging with human beings. And one of them, painting with a broad brush here, becomes a person with empathy, and the other one becomes pretty evil. And now, of course, anybody who read any sci-fi will immediately go like, yeah, isn't that a Stranger in a Strangeland kind of?
Oh.
I don't think it is at all, but I was wondering if you had this in your head where you go like, I can do much better than Heinlein, which I think you absolutely are, actually.
Well, since he was my first favorite writer, I guess he was always on my mind to a certain extent. But no, I don't know, and I'm not that analytical.
Camouflage also does something that you do often, I think, which is really brilliant. You're looking at I don't even know if that's a sci-fi trope. I'm not an expert. I'm just a reader. I enjoy when good authors look at the human condition through the eyes of an alien.
Well, it's something that has always attracted me to science fiction. I mean, from the time I was a 12-year-old reader to now, I enjoy the idea of having an alien construct, an alien set of sensory and logical processes that look at the world in a different way. But that becomes, a lot of writers do this. Now, the most obvious one is I often choose to write from a female viewpoint.
I was going to get there. That is actually quite brilliant, and you, I mean, you're not shying away from sex, which I think is great, but you show it in very often from a female viewpoint.
Well, I was just reading a thing about Carson McCullers, and she was a very male kind of female writer, and she was very curious about how men look at the world. I think that's there in my writing about women. But I believe, and I'd have to go over my own work chronologically to prove this, but I think that when I decided to make Carol Watchell an important character in Mindbridge, that was a conscious decision to say, well, I'm going to adopt a female point of view for this story. And yeah, it's like here's a thing that I did for her.
Was that the first one, Mindbridge? When was that? I haven't read that.
Yeah, that was I guess my third novel. I went back. I tried to go back in my mind to childhood, to infancy, and remember how I felt growing up, and try to say, how would I have felt if I was a girl? And I could actually do that duality up to about my late teenage years. And then it becomes more complicated, because when the potential of childbearing comes in, the world becomes much more complicated. And even just making the decision not to have children is earth-shaking in terms of your identity.
I was wondering, I don't know if you're on social media, if you're on Facebook or Twitter, and I'm wondering, because you said you have to go, you just said you have to go back and prove this to yourself, and then it shot into my mind that in today's day and age, a lot of authors or other artists have to interact with fans on a one-on-one, conversational platform on Facebook and Twitter, and a lot of authors are not very, I shouldn't say good at that. I mean, it's tough if you feel attacked for a certain way. And
I am on social media at one distincter move. My wife goes on the Facebook and such, and transmits what I wrote. I don't put anything out that's not been thought about.
You think about it, and then you give it to her, and then she filters it again, and then she puts it in. That's pretty smart.
It keeps me from saying something really impulsive and stupid.
I got to start doing that.
Get yourself a wife. Straighten up, yeah.
Well, I have one, but she's not on any of it. She was saying, you got to deal with your own crap if you can't keep your mouth shut.
Right.
So we're closing out the hour here. I'm very grateful for your time. It's a fascinating conversation, and I'm going to continue to go through your body of work. My final question, I always ask that, or the final topic is movies. Is this an important thing that you have an option that a movie's made of your books? I mean, today it seems, I don't know if that has changed, but a lot of authors that I speak to, they're very, very psyched about having a movie or a television deal. Of course, there is a monetary aspect to it. But I would be, I don't know how I would feel if I would hand over a child of mine to even the most talented person. And the other aspect is also that movies or visual entertainment is very restricting the imagination that we have as readers of text, where we can conjure up you give us the template of this world, and sure, there is some specificity about it, but we imagine the worlds in our heads as readers, and that just completely collapses in the visual medium. So I don't know how you feel about that. I know that the Forever War has been optioned for, 30 years or something, with Ridley Scott attached and whoever else.
Yeah, it was first option in 1974.
Oh my God!
Before the book was finished. Yeah, financially, it's very important. The movies are very important. Artistically, not so much. I'm not a movie writer. I have written scripts for both television and movies, and they've been okay. I mean, they make some money, but nobody has ever, wanted to put my footprint in the sidewalk any place or anything like that. Uh, I really loved working on movies because I'm sort of a team player, and I like having to get together everybody and work out the details and this and that. When we shot this movie in Rome, Robot Jocks.
Oh, Robot
And
Jocks, that's with Stuart Gordon. That's I read on your Wikipedia page where apparently you got into arguments with Stuart Gordon.
I had a great time with Stuart. I didn't argue much at all. We just really worked well together.
We got to change that stupid Wikipedia page.
He called me. He said, "You want to make a movie?" I said, "Sure." And so, yeah, I owe him everything in that. I'd get up about 3 a.m. and I'd write on the continuity, just sort of a shooting script, page by page. And then I'd go down at dawn, say about 6:30 or 7 a.m, and I'd hand it to them, and they would Xerox like 6 or 7 copies of what I'd written and send it out to the studio. And then I would take a nap, and then I would take a limousine out to the studio too and look at the day's rushes in the late afternoon. And it just kept a rolling thing going. I mean, this is before computers. I mean, there were computers, but they weren't in everyday use. For instance, we had a room full of typists.
Wow.
Women who sat and typed.
Because they had to type up the copies for all the different departments and actors and everything.
Exactly. And the script became this multicolored binder of stuff with, various versions on various colors of paper. So you had to sort them out and figure out what's going on. But it was a huge enterprise from my point of view because, like there was a room that had nothing but uniforms in it. And there were uniforms for over 100 people. And I thought, my God, all I did was type this up. There's a whole car that they built, a car that is based on one paragraph that I typed out in a couple of hours, in a couple of minutes, bing, 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 bing. And there it was suddenly sitting there, and they had to destroy it on the screen too. Oh God, that was wonderful. Well, I got to tell you, this one scene that we shot, we had 2 actors who were both athletes, and they had to do a fight scene where they fought in a living room, and the living room they just beat to pieces. There were broken glass everywhere and furniture flying and everything. Well, there was one female who was not a girl at all, but was wrapped up in protective gear, and they really rolled around, and it looked like they were really hurting each other. But of course, they're trained to do that. And we had roped off the scene, that part of the set, and everybody involved in the movie who could get off came to watch that being filmed. So we had like 70 people watching these 2 people beat the crap out of each other. And it was wonderful because when the scene was shot, everybody just burst into applause. And it was a wonderful, wonderful group feeling. Everybody was involved in that. And when you're making movies, I think the best times are when that sort of collective feeling comes out.
And that is something that you, of course, do not have ever when you're writing, because when you're writing, you got to go into solitary confinement.
Yeah. So you're typing along and you say, and then then the sun went nova and billions of people died. I said, oh, well, wasn't that a tragedy? Well, all right. Next chapter. Yeah. It's...
Ideally, you have it both, right? I mean, you wouldn't turn down another movie. I'm hearing. I mean,
I'd love to do another movie, but there are so many people who want to do movies. It'll never happen to me. Well, I have no special expertise, and probably there is a small army of people outside your door, just in Germany, who want to do movies and have the training and expertise.
Thank you, Joe. It's fantastic to have you here. All the best of luck with your next projects, and fingers crossed, or in your case, tentacles crossed, that maybe we'll see the Forever War on the movie screen at some point. And you should be on the set and smoking cigars. Or you don't smoke, I guess? No?
Yeah, well, I can't, but I'll chew on one.
in the limo, and you're sitting there with Ridley
Yeah.
Scott. All right. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say in closing that the next guest is going to be Ann Charnock on February 21st, I believe. Please check events.sansar.com. And then we have, in rapid succession, Matt Ruff, and has a new book, 88 Names. And then we have Ken Liu. And then we have Simon Sellers. Goodbye.